Hi, welcome to Reviews. I always get asked as a UX practitioner, what's your favorite UX research technique? And to that I always say the semi-structured interview. Now let me explain what that means. Semi-structured interviews are a staple food of the UX research business. You see, on the one end of the spectrum, you have a structured interview where the order of the questions is set, the structure of the interview is set, and you can't deviate from that. So kind of like a survey where all the questions are in the right order and you have to ask them in that particular manner. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are completely unstructured interviews where, like a Larry King interview, where he never had any set questions or a script that he followed. He just asked intuitively whatever came to his mind and it flowed that way. And right within those two extremes lies the semi-structured interview. It's like a framework for change. You have a framework of set questions or key questions that you want to answer as a UX practitioner. But there is also a freedom to move around and follow interesting threads, interesting leads, but then bring it back to the particular key questions that you have to answer. So it gives you the flexibility of, as long as you're answering the key questions in each session, you can deviate, probe a bit further on this or that, and so on. And until very recently, this would not have been my answer, the semi-structured interview, because it takes some amount of skill to pull it off. It's like wearing a Hawaiian shirt over a heavy metal t-shirt. It's not everybody can pull it off, but to pull it off, you need some level of confidence. Unfortunately, what happens a lot of times with these kinds of interviews is that they start off as a semi-structured interview, a framework within which you can move around. But as the research timeline progresses, more and more questions keep getting added into it, either because of a change in the scope of the study or an need to cater to multiple different stakeholders, for example, and various different reasons like that. More and more scripted elements started to get added into this semi-scripted structure, and it becomes, in my mind, what I'd like to call an overscripted interview. And this is unfortunate, but sometimes it's just a need of the project. Sometimes things just change around, especially in more of a dynamic environment. The stakeholders might have to quickly pivot to something, and that's just a part of the game. You have to go through it. But it's unfortunate because it means the practitioners or the moderator of the interview has to do some workarounds, like make sure to make a checklist of everything or memorize these particular questions that have been added and so on. And that just really removes the fun from it, in my opinion. And I say it's no fun because you're always so obsessed with dotting the I's and crossing the T's, making sure that all the participants are answering all the questions in that particular order. It really saps your freedom, the level of flexibility that you have. It really feels like being put into a straitjacket because you're so obsessed with making sure all the participants answer all the questions. The depth in which you can go, if you can really just be more flexible and riff on it and establish a rapport with the participant and make it more personal and less impersonal. That's the thing. When you overscript it or overstructure an interview, it becomes cold and impersonal. Like, what's the difference between you and just a Google form? They can just fill out a Google form online. Why do you have to be there in that case? Of course, these are all my opinions, and as I mentioned before, this may be the need of the hour. So how do you solve for that? My solution is, it's always about managing the expectations. So if there is an overscripting going on, you have to immediately set the expectation that, hey, you will get an answer, but this isn't going to be like the in-depth answer that you may have gotten if it was a bit more unstructured, open-ended, and given more time. Also, you can try to suggest changes to the question itself. Let's say somebody asks you, I just want them to choose between A and B. Can you just ask that? You can probably change the structure a little bit, make it more open-ended, have them experience one thing So you have experience A and then experience B, and then in the end get some ratings, so on and so forth. There are many ways you can solve for that if you have the flexibility. But sometimes you don't have that flexibility, and sometimes you just start off with the staple food kind of technique, which is one-on-one interviews, and then things start getting added, and then it just becomes very shallow. Instead of going in depth with multiple participants, you just focus on the numbers. Let's say you have 10 participants and you want to know, I want to have numbers on how many chose A and how many chose B, or how many clicked on this, how many clicked on that. I just want the numbers, because you're adopting a market research or wrong kind of a mindset. I wouldn't say market research is wrong. I would just say in the end it's all research. But when you're thinking of user experience research, it should be more about looking at people's behaviors, mining that for any hidden errors, hesitations, confusions that are coming out. And I don't think having an overscripted approach really helps with that. Another corollary to this is sometimes you tend to overscript yourself. Now, I'm speaking from personal experience. When I was new to UX, I didn't quite have that interviewing skill. I wouldn't say I'm some kind of master interviewer or something, but initially I used to put on training wheels on a bike, right? I used to have these scripted things for each and every section of the interview, the introduction, and even when you're establishing a rapport with the participant, as soon as they enter your facility, the interview doesn't actually just begin when they're sitting face to face. It begins when they enter the facility and when they sign the forms and so on, and you start talking to them about small talk, like, how was the traffic? Did you find it right? Do you have any questions? Is this your first experience with an interview or something like that? Or ask them about like sports as you're walking them into the room and before you begin your introduction. That's one of the key aspects of establishing a rapport with the participant. And I used to even script that, because I mentioned in an older video, I didn't have much of an experience with the American culture or way of life, and maybe having retail experience would have helped me with that. I'll link to the video later on, but that was where I was coming from, right? I didn't have any frame of reference, so I used to script down, okay, talk about sports, talk about some event that happened, or talk about traffic or something like that. And as I became more and more experienced, I realized I didn't need to put those overly scripted events into my discussion guides, in my conversations. I can be more free. But again, like I mentioned, you need that level of confidence. You need to live through those experiences and learn how to ride the bike, if you will, and then you can remove the training wheels. But if you keep the training wheels on, you won't fall, of course, but you won't be able to do some tricks like moving fast or making quick turns. You can't do those things if you just force those training wheels onto yourself. And that's what I mean by don't overscript yourself. It's also kind of a philosophical discussion you can have. It's about how you think about it. Is it classical music where the sheets are written down and you just have to follow that? Or is it more like jazz music where the missed notes or off-key notes are not only welcomed, but they're worked around and become a part of that whole experience, right? That's kind of a key philosophical difference. You can also think of it like an Indian classical music where the rag has a particular set of notes and a particular structure, but within that structure, within that framework, a classical vocalist can sing for multiple hours with multiple variations, and every time it's a unique experience, a new experience. And it's also about kind of like the symbol of the Tao or the Tao, where you have to give away some control to the participant, let them talk about their experiences and their anecdotes, and if you need to, for time or for whatnot, we can get back the control, say politely, hey, I'm cutting you off right there, and do that kind of a unique interplay. It's a more challenging, but it's more rewarding, and you get a lot more in-depth knowledge from that. And finally, since everything is professional wrestling. I like to bring professional wrestling into other aspects of my life as well. So how does a semi-structured interview versus an over-scripted interview make me feel? When you're over-scripted, I kind of feel like when John Moxley, then formerly known as Dean Ambrose in the WWE, he used to feel like he didn't have any creative freedom or creative inputs. He talked about it in an episode of the Stone Cold podcast, which again is a great example of how an interview can go off the rails, how an interview, the starting point needs to be correct. Otherwise, it just ends up being a very bad interview. And that's a great example of that. Towards the end, when John Moxley at that point is the WWE champion, and so Stone Cold, of course, who is the interviewer, says, hey, you're the champion, I want you to take everything to the next level. You've talked a lot about your creative freedoms and so on. I think you should take the creative freedom and you should bring everything to the next level. And to which John responds by saying, I mean, while that's really great and everything, as much as I would like to do that, I can't do that, because in the end, I'm playing in someone else's yard. I'm playing in someone else's sandbox. And that's really how it feels like when you have so many ideas and you have so many interesting threads that you can pull in any interview, but no, you have to make sure all the questions are answered. And compare that to John Moxley's debut in AEW, the new alternative to WWE that came out, where he came in from the crowd. He has a new name, a new moniker. He called himself the unscripted John Moxley, right? And I would say he's more of a semi-scripted, because in his head he knows what points to touch, but how to get there is all up to him. He has that creative freedom, and he completely re-energized and very happy kind of a person. He came in through the crowd during his debut, and he did something like this. He breathing in the crowd, looking at the crowd, and knowing that he's free to do things the way he would like. And the commentators also said he looks like he's most creatively fulfilled than any other point in his career. That's one of the all-time great calls during his debut. So that's what I feel as well. When you have a guide and you know what points to touch and you know how to get there on your own, and you have been given that faith and you have that faith in yourself, that even though you have a heavy metal shirt with a Hawaiian shirt on top, you know how to pull it off. That's the creative freedom. That's the beauty, in my opinion, of a semi-structured interview. And that's why it catches on so much, right? The problem is, of course, when a guide or a guideline for an interview turns into a script, you have to follow that. One last example, when I was a child, in kindergarten, they used to teach you how to color, right? And they instructed everyone to color it red, but I colored it blue. And when I think back to that memory, I always think, why were they teaching you to color it red? Why didn't they just teach you to color it? And you can fill in whatever colors you want. So yes, I have philosophized about this quite a lot, and I am sure many different practitioners in the UX business have different opinions on this, but I would love to know everybody's thoughts on it. This is why a semi-structured interview is my favorite, and that's why I think these should not be over-scripted. If you watched till the end of this video, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. I really like it when people watch the videos. I'm only human. I like it when the numbers go up in the analytics and I get more likes and I get more comments, and people really have a good conversation in the comment section. So I would really like everybody to like this video and leave a comment on your opinions on this and what are your thoughts on if you have philosophized like I have. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.